Everybody, welcome back. We have an exciting tool which we've created. It's very timely, and I've got the architect here, Ahmed, with the Izba team. So, Ahmed, let's just kind of before we show the tool, what were some of the problems we were trying to solve here?
Yeah, so obviously a lot of our clients have been dealing with the tariffs. I mean, every week we're hearing something new. With China, there was like the 125% tariff, and then the next week, we're hearing, okay, now there's a 30% cap, and all of this stuff. And I think that one of the issues is that we obviously do this, for our clients all the time, and we have a process where we're showing them like exact figures of what they can expect based on forecasts and so on. However, we figured that there was a way to kind of create like a sample or a way where we can allow folks to simulate, because oftentimes it's hard to know like what each tariff means, what it's for, and so on. So that way it kind of takes away like a lot of the thinking that goes into it, and just allows somebody who says like, I know what product I'm importing. I just want to know how much it's going to cost me. And I want to know like, what would it be if I actually shifted manufacturing to a different country?
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that in addition to providing a tool that people can actually use as we're role playing tariffs, this was also kind of a case study in some of the capabilities that ISBA has in terms of making these sorts of tools. Can you talk a little bit about what we're able to do on this end?
Yeah, for sure. So I think like one of the things that has really opened up a lot of opportunity for us as a consulting company is obviously the emergence of AI. And now, there's a lot of really great stuff out there in terms of tooling to be able to build internal tools similar to the simulator, and then also being able to access data. So we've been able to build this, within a couple weeks, and it was just an idea that we had, and we're like, hey, like let's actually test this out and see how it works, because obviously like Excel is a good old friend, but sometimes actually being able to share something online, you need something a little bit more. So this has been like a really, really great use case of like what our capabilities are and what we could do.
Awesome. Well, let's dive in. Why don't you bring up the tool and give us a walkthrough?
Yeah, of course. So this is our Tariff Impact Simulator. Obviously, when you first land on the page, there isn't any data to simulate, and it asks you to do that. And it tells you, any number of the things that it can do, whether it's, the tariff calculations themselves, or, it can even account for currency fluctuations, which is something that's really cool that you can't do in Excel. Well, you kind of can, but, it's easier to do it online, is you get real-time currency rates, and which is built into the tool itself. So all you have to do is go here and first add your first product. So let's say that we want to add, dresses. You have, a D2C business where you import dresses from China. So let's say material cost is, $30 is probably actually much less than that. Let's say it's, $10. And then it's another, $5 in labor and $2 in overhead, just as an example. And we're going to produce, 10,000 units. One thing about this particular form is that you can go back and forth and edit as much as you want, and the calculator or simulator will keep updating. One thing that's worth noting here is that obviously if you're doing ocean freight, you want to just remember to check this box to allow you to know like what the actual landed cost fees would be, including for imports. So once you update this, the simulator runs, you can see all the calculation already happened, tells you what your cost per unit is, what the expected tariff is, because obviously we're sourcing here from China, and the current cap is at 30%. And that tells you also what your tariff per unit will be and what your total tariff will be. But if you want to see the actual comparison here, in this table, you'll see the comparison between, well, what would it cost to produce this in the US versus China versus Vietnam and so on, like all the countries that we had in the selection box up above. The other thing you could do here is that you can, again, add as many products as you want. So, we're importing not just dresses today, but we're also importing shoes. So we'll go in here and I'm going to, pick out, some regular kicks. And again, here the cost is probably a little higher in terms of material, maybe a little higher in labor. Same thing with overhead. And again, still producing in China. And you can select any country you want as far as like your country of manufacture. And here we'll say, we're going to produce 15,000 units. So let's update this. So a few neat things. The chart above, by the way, got populated. You're able to see your tariff per country. And you can also switch here between like, okay, we were looking at dresses earlier. We can also look at the shoes. You can see the tariff differences. And you'll notice if we go down to the table, we go down here. So right now, pay attention to the MFN duty line. So this is actually calculated based on the actual HTS code that you selected. So if you're choosing shoes versus dresses, obviously they're going to be different. So in the case of like Vietnam or India, let's take a look at what the MFN would be versus shoes. So obviously shoes, it goes down to 5%, significantly less. And then the tariff here, you'll see tariffs are basically everything from this first line, which is the MFN duty, all the way down to reciprocal. These down here are fees, and they're just import fees. They're not tariffs. They're completely separate. But the way that the tariffs work is that they stack. So what we're doing is that we're taking the aggregate of the material, labor, and overhead, and then we're basically taking the percentage of that to calculate what the duty is for each one of these. And then once you've had basically the list of products that you want, in this case, dresses and shoes, you can easily export your results into a PDF. And we're working on a feature working to allow folks to also export it as CSV if they want as well. But for more advanced users and folks who want to do some really fancy stuff, you can open this override capability, which if, for example, that hey, there's a new reciprocal, tariff that's being imposed on, let's say, India that wasn't there before. All I have to do is basically select, reciprocal. And then I can see right now, like, let's say in the case of India, it's 10%, but actually, so there's a reciprocal tariff there, but like, let's say it's actually not 10% anymore and it's dropped to 0. So I could just basically have that here, select India. And if I add that as a rule, you'll see it gets added there. And then if we go down here and we can see, there it is. There's 0 reciprocal tariffs added to India. And that's really it. I mean, it's a very simple tool, but it's very powerful because it takes into account, live currency exchanges. It takes into account the tariff updates. We try our best to keep it up to date. But in the event that you want to do some scenario planning and hey, like the tariffs against, or the cap on tariffs with China is going to go away in August, and I want to know what's going to happen in August and what's actually going to cost me, all you have to do is remove this rule, which is currently like set to create a cap for China at 30%, just as an example. Or if some other changes are coming down the pipeline, so you can, again, play within a bunch of different scenarios to arrive at what your landed cost is going to be and what to expect in the future, so you can do some better planning.
Yeah, I love it. And this is free, right? You can just go to the Izba website, play with it, check it out. And so I think this is a great thing. I want to shift a little bit and talk about how we built the tool, because I think, the tool is useful and people will get it. But I think how we went about doing this in such a short period of time is really the real story, in my opinion.
Yeah. There was definitely a lot of planning. So I think that the way to describe it is that it started off with an idea. We were all talking in Slack about like, hey, these tariffs are crazy. One day it's
Wouldn't it
on,
be nice
one day it's off, right? And then we basically started planning and thinking about like, okay, what if we created a way to make it easier to kind of scenario plan and think about like, well, what would happen if the tariffs were to go up or to go away and so on. And when we did that, we started planning. We used a bunch of AI tools. I personally like to use Claude, which is by Anthropic, to kind of like think through like, okay, if we want to build a simulator, what are all the requirements and things that we would need to kind of go into that? And definitely we needed to really vet and think through like how all the calculations happen and how they kind of cascade, because again, there's a lot of logic complexity that goes into that. And then we also needed to figure out like how to pull in like the API data for the exchange rate. And then also basically source all the data for the HTS codes and the tariff rates and all the exceptions and so on. And one thing actually I didn't mention that is on the tool itself at the bottom or the footer of the page, you'll see like how the model is created, what are the exceptions and things that you should know and definitions and so on, and how the calculations were made. Again, full visibility. So once we had all that stuff and we had that in our database, we just went about building this in Lovable, which is the tool that we are using internally to build some of these internal apps. And yeah, it's just a lot of prompt engineering and just saying like, hey, like this is how the logic works. Here's how the calculation works. But man, like it goes by so much better and easier, and the quality is better if you do a lot of planning ahead of time, because you need to think about like how the calculation works. How do you create an override if you do that later? and like the interaction between all these different things, because again, you can run into like logic problems if you don't plan it correctly. So, just as an example, like if you were to add like data into like the material cost, right? And, somewhere along the line, you add a calculation, but then you need to recalculate it because like the material cost changes later. And then there's an override. Like you can see very quickly how like these things can cause like collisions in terms of like the logic that it's trying to build. So the more that you plan ahead and you think through these problems, the easier it goes.
No, that's a great summary. I mean, I think the unique use case here was we wanted to build a public-facing app, right? We wanted to be able to put something on a website people went to, and so talk to me a little bit about why you chose Lovable in this case as opposed to any of the other tools that we're fluent in.
So Lovable does like a bunch of really nice things. So it has a lot of like the UI UX stuff figured out. So you don't necessarily need to be overly verbose or very knowledgeable about design to tell it like what to build. You just simply tell it like, hey, I want to build a calculator to do X. And then it starts building it and it looks pretty. And clearly they've spent a lot of time on design. It uses a library called Shade CDN to be able to actually build a lot of these things. So a lot of the components and the graphs and so on, like these are things that are kind of like off-the-shelf components that you kind of put together. Yeah, just a lot of like prompting, and it starts building it out. And it also is fully integrated into Supabase, which is our backend system that we use for storing the data, as well as doing a bunch of different fetches and things like that. So it's fully integrated. You don't need to mess with multiple different systems. You just go to one tool and you tell it like, this is what I'm building, this is what I want, and it helps build it for you.
That's great. Yeah, and so I think really the broader implications here is if there is a brand out there that's looking to build a custom applet on their website, or they're looking to build an internal tool that allows people to kind of interact, and there's just the barriers have come down for how easy it is to make
It's
some
super easy.
lightweight software.
It's super easy. Again, like the complex part is really the planning and really knowing your stuff, like making sure that the calculations are actually accurate, that you're pulling data from like legitimate sources and credible sources. But the actual building process is simple as, hey, this is the calculation, this is what I want it to do, and here's the plan, and it starts building everything for you.
Great. Yeah, and I think on top of all of the stuff going on in your job, your role, I think we went from idea to product in just over 2 weeks, if I have the math right.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was a fun journey, and it's our first public tool, and we're hoping that we'll be releasing more in the future. And I think the expectation or the hope is that people benefit a lot from this tool, and that it's timely, and that they find that this is something that they're able to use in their business.
Awesome. Well, Ahmed, thank you for coming and sharing what you built. We're really excited about this, not only in the tool itself, but what we're able to do now. If you've got more questions, please check us out at izba.co. Thanks.